Your husband was shot down over Laos in, do I have it right, in May 1965? Is that right?
May 18th, 1965.
May 1865. So explain, he's shot down over Laos. Explain why the conversation has thus far focused on Vietnam. Why are we focusing on Vietnam when the shoot down took place over Laos?
Because over the years, they always said that the Vietnamese controlled the Laotian. So we have always considered that they had an input in the Laotian part of it. But then when you see the documents, which I didn't find until the mid-'80s or the mid-'90s, when I started doing my really
research
investigation,
yeah.
Then I see in documents where the Laotian states very plainly to Kissinger that no, we will not release our POWs through Vietnam. And so Kissinger couldn't get the Laotians to release their prisoners through Vietnam. So what Kissinger did is he basically said, well, there were 10 POWs that had been captured in Laos, but they were moved up the Ho Chi Minh Trail and actually held in Vietnam. They were never held in Laos. And so what Kissinger said, well, we'll just use these and say that these are the Laotian POWs. So he could say that he actually had, POWs from Laos.
Now, in your case, and help me if I have this wrong, your husband is shot down in 65, but we know that he survived that because there was a broadcast in 1966, if I have that right, and then also a photograph of him that appeared in the Pravda newspaper in the Soviet Union.
Correct.
And is that the last definite information that you have?
I didn't know. See, the thing is, you have to understand that I was never given any documents. I was never shown any documents. I was only talked to by casualty over the years. So I was totally unaware of most of this stuff until 1990 when I got a live sighting report on David. But as I went back and looked through, they declared David presumptive finding of death in 1977. And when they did that, they sent me a file, which was the original file, which I never even looked at. I mean, I didn't go through because I thought that the U.S. government had proof of what had happened to David and that whatever documents were in there were correlated to David. And it wasn't until 1992 when I went to the Senate Select Committee hearings, then I started going through the box. There were all kinds of reports on David that they were receiving from 1965 through 1968. And then there were other, the one thing I did learn with the POW issue is the reason that they don't give the family the information is because they put it in a generic thing, and they will say 2 POWs over here, 10 POWs over there, 7 POWs over here. So they never put a name to them. They won't identify them like, say, Hrdlicka and Shelton are over here, and Jock and Smith and Jones are over there. They don't do that because then they are supposedly under obligation to give the family members that information. So as you get into this issue, it's kind of like the pea under the shell, and they keep moving things around so that the families can't get all the information. And that's how it's worked all these years. Well, I found all of these documents that talk about POWs. They don't talk about David by name, but they talk in Laos that there are 20 POWs held over here. There are 7 held over here. Well, who's to say one of them isn't David Hrdlicka? Because the United States government themselves, time and time again in reports, would state, well, there are only 2 POWs in all of Laos, which we knew that to be a lie, because there were over 500 men shot down. Well, out of 500 men, you know that there have to be more than 2 POWs. There has to be more. Well, They didn't have satellite. They had the NSC had photographed aerial photography is what they used early on, and they took an aerial photo of 20 POWs, and they were out in front of a cave, and they were playing some kind of a sport, and they call it the volleyball photo. So I don't know whether it was volleyball or soccer, but it shows 20 POWs. Well, of course, I was totally unaware of that.
And so, is this part of what's referred to as the live sighting reports?
Well, there are other live sighting reports that are separate from this photo.
Right.
The photo was the big thing because, and over the years, there's been satellite imagery and all kinds of things that prove that there were men there.
Yeah.
And the live sighting report, I got my only live sighting report in 1990. And see, up until that time, I thought, when the U.S. government declared David dead, I thought they had the information and the evidence to show that David had died. Never thinking for a minute, that they would just kill somebody off with no evidence. Well, then when I received that 1990 report, I was shocked. And so, of course, that's what brought me back into the issue, was that report.
Tell me, what was the essence of the report? Did the report, it definitely identified David Hrdlicka?
It basically stated in this one paragraph, it states, it's an individual that gave the report, and he said, I am talking to General Chang, suspected of holding D. Hrdlicka and friends. Well, I looked at that and I went, oh my God, that's present tense. That's not having held as opposed to holding. What does that tell you? To me, that says this is a live situation.
Where do things stand now? We're so far removed in time now from this, although time flies, of course. Where do things stand now? The shoot down takes place in 1965. The report you have, you see that in 1990. Where do things stand now?
Well, I had really high hopes when Obama went to Laos. And I don't remember what year it was. It was just before he went out of office. And I had really high hopes that maybe he would lay the groundwork for bringing home the POWs, or whatever POWs are still alive, because we know that they're not all still alive, that there are ones that have died from old age, from disease, whatever. That just stands to reason that has happened. But I was hoping that President Trump would pick up on the fact that Obama had opened the door to Laos, and now that Trump would go in there and bring home the remaining men that were alive, because some of those guys were shot down in their 20s, and so they could possibly still be alive.
But that didn't, nothing materialized on that front.
No, that was it. Obama went over there and gave them money for, all of the live ordnance that's still buried there, that's blowing up young children and farmers and livestock, and, the Laotians have a terrible mess to clean up over there with no help.
Right. How would you summarize, looking back now at this, the story that has been, I'm imagining, a central fact of your life since the mid-1960s? Is there any way to sort of sum it all up? You can imagine putting yourself in front of a crowd and, here's the summary of the story that I've lived since the mid-1960s. Is there a way to do that?
Well, I don't think there's any way of doing that, because the sad part is, to me, is that we keep sending all these young men and women off into harm's way, And just like, now we have people coming back from Afghanistan that they've got head injuries, they've got, arms and legs missing, and the DA doesn't take care of them. It's a typical thing during the Vietnam War. It was Agent Orange. The U.S. government denied that Agent Orange had anything to do with any of the problems that the Vietnam vets were having. And after the bulk of the Vietnam vets died, then they finally own up to the fact that there is Agent Orange. And that is government's modus operandi. They will fight you tooth and nail, and then when it's all said and done and everybody's dead and everybody's gone away, then they'll own up to it. And it just disturbs me to know that they keep sending these young people off into harm's way, and then they don't take care of them when they bring them back.
Yeah. I read in an article from the 90s where you say that David, quote, was an inconvenience to the government. What did you mean by that at that time? What's your interpretation of why, in your view, the government didn't really go all out to find out what happened?
Well, basically, David was one of the ones that got his picture out, did interviews, or, they did the tape recordings. They said it was David's voice, but of course we don't know. So he was an inconvenience because he was a known POW. It was very easy. Well, I can back up a little bit here. When I looked at the paperwork, it was in that file, I realized they did, over the years, is they used David to cover up other POWs. Because a report would come in and it would say, a pilot was shot down on June the 6th, 1966, and he had 3 sons. And they said, oh, well, that was Hrdlicka because it's in Hrdlicka's area. No, that wasn't Hrdlicka. It was somebody else that had 3 sons. And then they would say, oh, well, we lost 6 men in June. All those correlated to David. Okay, there are 6 more men didn't go on a POW list. David was a POW, and they could not deny it.
Because of the photo that had come out in Pravda.
The photo, and then he wrote a letter to the Prince of Laos asking for his release. And so there was just too much information. And Shelton was another one that was a highly publicized POW. So they had 2 POWs that they couldn't get rid of because they had too much publicity on them. So he was definitely an inconvenience to the U.S. government. And so what they said about over the years was continually killing David off. And every time I would find information that showed David survived, then they would debunk that information and consider him. And in their statement, they say, we believe he died. Belief is not acceptable. You should have to prove he is dead. I had to keep proving he was alive, but they didn't have to prove that he was dead.
And is it your view that the reason that the federal government is not, in your view, vigorously pursuing this because they just didn't want to spend time, resources, and energy on that because they didn't want to? What do you think prevented the federal government from expending sufficient time, energy, resources on this and nailing it down?
I consider 2 things. First of all, Laos was a secret war, and they didn't want to publicly admit that they were in a country illegally doing illegal things, the government, the U.S. government. Okay. Secondly, they didn't want to bring these men home because then that is, you have to realize there were men's careers built on the Vietnam War. You've got Kissinger, you've got Nixon, you've got General Powell. The list just is astronomical to the people that were involved in the Vietnam War. And for them to own up to the fact that they left POWs alive in captivity, is that a good advertisement for the U.S. government? That when you get in harm's way, they will walk away and leave you in a heartbeat? I don't think that's a good advertisement for them.
I see. So rather than acknowledge that there had been a prior failing, just don't acknowledge that there was a prior failing. Just keep moving on. That's basically what you're saying. Yeah.
What you have is in 1973, when President Nixon went on TV and he stated after the first wave of POWs came home, the 591, when he got on TV and said, all of the POWs are home. That was the policy. That was set into place. So when you have a policy, a U.S. policy, put in place, everybody in every government agency, that's the policy. So when a report comes in and it says there's a live guy on an island close to Vietnam, they have to debunk that because the policy is they're all dead.
In all these years, has anyone in the federal government reached out in a meaningful way? You know, I mean, sort of human to human. Have you ever felt that there was anyone along the way who really did try to reach out and to?
Yes, General Tide tried very hard in the mid '80s to do something about the POWs and to bring them home. But you see, he's up against a great big machine of people that do not want the POWs to come home because that looks bad for Kissinger. Kissinger got a peace prize for his negotiations. Now, how would that look if a whole bunch of POWs came out after he supposedly had negotiated for all of the release of all POWs?
Okay, so as you scan your memory, then the one person who stands out who really did,
Great harm.
To make progress on this was General Ty.
Oh, General Ty was, he was our savior. But over the years, I have run into people inside the U.S. government that are good people, but their hands are tied. Like I told you, once the policy is set in place, they can't go against the policy.
Yeah. Wow. If it's okay, if it's not okay, fine. But just the next question I have in mind is, if you could just tell us a little bit about David as a person, what he was like.
He was a very kind man, and he saw good in everybody, and he was just a good person. He enjoyed flying. He enjoyed his life. He enjoyed his family, and he was just a really good person. If he wasn't, then I wouldn't have fought so hard.
That makes sense. How long, now, if I have it right, he flew out of Thailand, is that right?
Yeah, he flew out of Thailand.
He was based in Thailand, Air Force. I'm sorry?
Thailand.
Oh, right, yeah. And how long had he been in Thailand? Do you know how many missions he had flown prior?
No, he left here April the 7th, and he was shot down May 18th. So, and he had a 2-week, what they called R&R, rest and relaxation. He had a 2-week in Bangkok just before he got shot. Yeah.
So he wasn't in theater very long then. He probably didn't have very many missions.
In our squadron was the first squadron sent from McConnell Air Force Base. And our first casualty happened within about a week or so. The next one happened on May 9th, and then David was on May 18th. So we lost 3, relatively soon after they got over there.
Yeah. What's your last memory of David?
I was walking across the lawn as he was getting into the Air Force vehicle to leave. He had his bag with him, and they were picking staff cars. Well, it's not a staff car, I guess. Was picking all of the pilots up that morning.
Wow. Where are things now? When we think about the POW issue, of course, in the in the 80s, the latter part of the 80s, the 90s, there was a lot of attention on this, the 70s as well. Where do things stand now? You know, we refer to the POW MIA community, sort of where do things stand now?
Well, I would basically say that our window of opportunity was in 1990 because we had a lot of information. We had a lot of, I guess you would say, wind behind our sail. Things were going good. But every time, and you can look throughout the 90s on all of the information that came out, like, for instance, satellite imagery showing there were men on the ground. They were putting their distress signals in the side of the hills and the brush and what have you. The U.S. government absolutely ignored it. Ignored all of those requests for those men to come home. And I just find that very sad that you've got men that are over there on the ground asking to come home. And during the Dornan hearings, we had many, many hearings on the subject. And we kept proving that there were men there alive, but nothing was ever done. There was never any follow-up. It was very frustrating. But anyway, during the Dornan hearings, I was sitting in his office one day, and one of his chief guy that was working on the hearings handed me a letter, or a report, I guess you would say. And in that report, it states that a man by the name of Major Gould had gotten a letter out via the Laotian to the United States government, and he said, I have a Laotian wife and children, but I want to come home. And that was about 95, I think it was, time frame. And I looked at that letter and I thought, how sad. They have put down satellite imagery asking to come home because that's a distress signal of the pilot. Then you have a man that has actually gotten the letter out, and everything that has come out showing live POWs, the U.S. government agencies defunct. And I just don't know how people could work in those agencies and see that information and realize the plight of these men and them do nothing. Nothing. It's very, I don't understand a government that does that. Because I, as an individual, well, General Ty tried, but, he was outnumbered. And I had gotten into the Clinton White House, and we gave them information, and they had information, and presidency after presidency after presidency did nothing. They were surrounded by the people that careers had been made on the Vietnam War, and they didn't want this coming out.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess there's no way to end this on an upbeat note. I mean, it just seems like, I don't know. It just seems like, is that sort of how it feels to you? Like you do all of this work and then you walk into the room and the light goes out, and that's.
Right. No, it's an ongoing thing because you just never give up because you never know what door might open. And, I've always thought, if a door opens, then I try to go through it. If there's an opportunity that arises, then I'm going to run the opportunity down. And you never know. I mean, it's an unending, not knowing situation.